The rain hammered against the windows of the small police station in downtown San Antonio as Sergeant Mike Rodriguez finished his third cup of coffee. It was well past midnight on a Tuesday, and the station was unusually quiet except for the occasional drunk driver being processed. Rodriguez had been working the night shift for 8 years, and nothing much surprised him anymore. Domestic disputes, bar fights, and petty theft filled most of his reports. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't explain why. Officer Janet Williams sat across from him, filling out paperwork from an earlier arrest. She was relatively new to the force, having joined just 2 years ago after completing her criminal justice degree. Williams took pride in following procedure to the letter, something that sometimes annoyed her more experienced colleagues but earned her respect from the supervisors. The radio crackled to life around 12:45 a.m. A traffic stop had gone sideways about 3 miles from their location. Officer Danny Chen's voice came through, slightly breathless and clearly agitated. He had pulled over a black sedan for speeding and erratic driving, but the situation had escalated quickly when the driver refused to cooperate with standard sobriety tests. Rodriguez and Williams exchanged glances. Chen was known for his calm demeanor and professional approach. If he was calling for backup, something was seriously wrong. They grabbed their gear and headed out into the storm, their patrol car's lights cutting through the heavy rain as they raced toward Chen's location. When they arrived at the scene, they found Chen standing next to his patrol car, speaking rapidly into his radio. The black sedan sat pulled over on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically in the darkness. Through the driver's side window, they could see a figure slumped slightly forward, apparently unresponsive to Chen's repeated attempts at communication. Chen approached them as they stepped out of their vehicle. His face was flushed, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. The driver had initially seemed cooperative during the traffic stop, he explained, but when asked to step out of the vehicle for field sobriety tests, everything changed. The woman behind the wheel had become belligerent and refused to follow simple commands. When Chen attempted to open the car door, she had allegedly tried to grab his service weapon. Williams felt her adrenaline spike as Chen described the incident. Attempting to disarm a police officer was a serious felony, and the situation required immediate action. Rodriguez nodded grimly and approached the passenger side of the sedan while Williams moved to provide backup support. The standard protocol was clear: secure the suspect, ensure officer safety, and process the arrest according to established procedures. The woman in the car appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She wore what looked like civilian clothes, but something about her posture and bearing suggested military background. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, and she stared straight ahead without acknowledging the officers surrounding her vehicle. Rodriguez tapped on the passenger window and identified himself. The woman slowly turned her head toward him, and he was struck by her piercing blue eyes and the calm, controlled expression on her face. There was no sign of intoxication that he could detect, no slurred speech or glassy-eyed stare that typically accompanied drunk driving cases. Instead, she seemed completely alert and aware of her surroundings. Williams approached the driver's side door and repeated the standard commands. The woman needed to step out of the vehicle immediately and place her hands where they could be seen. Any sudden movements would be considered threatening, and force would be used if necessary to ensure everyone's safety. The woman listened without comment, then slowly shook her head. The refusal to comply triggered the next level of response. Rodriguez and Williams positioned themselves strategically around the vehicle, while Chen called for additional backup. The situation was escalating beyond a simple traffic stop, and they needed more resources to handle what was becoming a high-risk arrest scenario. What happened next would be disputed in the reports that followed. According to Chen's initial statement, the woman suddenly lunged for something in the center console of her car. Fearing she was reaching for a weapon, he moved quickly to prevent what he perceived as an imminent threat. The driver's side door was yanked open, and the woman was pulled from the vehicle with considerable force. The arrest was not gentle. Standard police training emphasizes controlling dangerous suspects quickly and decisively to prevent injury to officers or bystanders. The woman was forced to the ground face first, her arms twisted behind her back as Rodriguez applied handcuffs. She did not resist physically, but she continued to speak in a calm, measured voice that seemed oddly out of place given the circumstances. Williams searched the vehicle while Rodriguez and Chen secured the suspect. Inside the center console, she found a military identification card that made her stop and read twice. The name on the ID matched the driver's license they had confiscated, but the rank and service record indicated something that seemed impossible given their current situation. The woman they had just arrested was General Patricia Hammond, a 3-star general in the United States Army with over 30 years of distinguished service. Her military record included combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, numerous commendations for leadership under fire, and a current assignment to Pentagon strategic planning operations. She was, according to the identification documents, one of the highest-ranking female officers in the entire military. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop as he processed this information. Arresting a general officer was far outside his pay grade and experience level. Military personnel, especially senior officers, operated under different legal jurisdictions than civilian suspects. There were protocols and procedures that governed interactions between civilian law enforcement and military personnel, and he had no idea whether they were following them correctly. Chen's radio report had described a belligerent drunk driver who attempted to assault an officer. The woman sitting in their patrol car bore no resemblance to that description. General Hammond sat quietly in the back seat, her military bearing evident even with her hands cuffed behind her back. She had not spoken since being placed in custody, but her eyes tracked everything happening around her with sharp intelligence. The additional backup units arrived within minutes, bringing the total number of officers on scene to 7. Sergeant Lisa Torres, the shift supervisor, took control of the situation and began reviewing what had transpired. She listened to Chen's account of events, examined the evidence collected from the vehicle, and reviewed the arrest procedures that had been followed. Something did not add up. Torres had been a police officer for 15 years and had seen thousands of drunk driving arrests. The suspect showed none of the typical signs of intoxication. Her speech was clear and coherent, her movements were controlled and precise, and the field sobriety tests that should have been administered before the arrest had somehow been skipped entirely. General Hammond finally spoke as Torres approached the patrol car. Her voice was steady and professional, with the tone of someone accustomed to command authority. She requested permission to make a phone call, as was her right under both civilian law and military regulations. Torres hesitated, unsure of the proper protocol for handling a military officer of such high rank. The general's request was reasonable and legal, but Torres sensed that granting it might complicate an already confusing situation. Military officers had access to legal resources and command structures that could quickly escalate a local police matter into something much larger. On the other hand, denying the request could violate the suspect's constitutional rights and create legal problems for the department. After consulting with Rodriguez and Williams, Torres decided to allow the phone call. They transported General Hammond to the police station, where she was processed according to standard procedures. Her fingerprints were taken, photographs were captured for booking records, and her personal effects were cataloged and stored. Throughout this process, she remained cooperative, but maintained her silence about the events that had led to her arrest. The booking area of the police station felt tense as officers processed what was certainly the most high-profile arrest any of them had ever made. Word spread quickly through the department that they had a general officer in custody, and supervisors who had gone home for the evening began receiving phone calls from subordinates seeking guidance on proper procedures. General Hammond was placed in a holding cell while Torres completed the necessary paperwork. The charges being filed included driving under the influence, resisting arrest, and attempted assault on a police officer. Each charge carried significant penalties, and the combination could result in years of prison time if she were convicted in civilian court. The phone call General Hammond had requested was finally granted at 2:30 a.m. Torres escorted her to a private room where she could make contact with whatever legal representation or command structure she needed to notify of her situation. The general picked up the receiver and dialed a number from memory, speaking quietly into the phone for approximately 10 minutes. Torres could not hear the conversation clearly, but she noticed that General Hammond's demeanor became even more controlled and professional during the call. Whatever she was discussing, it was being handled with the same methodical precision that had characterized her behavior throughout the entire arrest process. After hanging up the phone, General Hammond looked directly at Torres and spoke for the first time since requesting the call. She thanked the sergeant for professional treatment and indicated that she expected the situation to be resolved quickly. There was no anger in her voice, no threat or intimidation, just a quiet confidence that suggested she knew something Torres did not. The general was returned to her holding cell, and Torres began the long process of completing arrest reports and documenting everything that had occurred during the traffic stop and subsequent booking procedures. She had a nagging feeling that the night's events were far from over, but she could not have anticipated how dramatically the situation was about to change. As dawn approached, Torres received a phone call that would alter the trajectory of every officer involved in General Hammond's arrest. The voice on the other end of the line was crisp, official, and carried an authority that made Torres's blood run cold. The caller identified himself as Colonel James Mitchell from the Pentagon's Office of the Inspector General, and he had some very serious questions about the treatment of one of the Army's most senior officers. The conversation that followed would be the first of many that would ultimately expose a web of misconduct, procedural violations, and career-ending mistakes that had begun with what seemed like a routine traffic stop. For Officers Chen, Rodriguez, and Williams, the real consequences of their actions were just beginning to unfold, and none of them were prepared for what was coming next. Colonel James Mitchell's voice cut through the early morning stillness of the police station like a blade. Sergeant Torres had fielded hundreds of calls from angry relatives, lawyers, and bail bondsmen over the years, but nothing had prepared her for the controlled fury in the Pentagon officer's tone. He spoke with the precision of someone accustomed to giving orders that moved mountains and ended careers, and Torres realized immediately that her department had stepped into something far larger than a simple drunk driving case. The colonel's questions were pointed and specific. He wanted to know the exact time of the traffic stop, the justification for the initial vehicle pursuit, and the specific evidence that had led to charges of driving under the influence. Most troubling, he demanded details about the alleged attempt to disarm Officer Chen, an accusation that could result in federal charges if proven true. Torres found herself struggling to provide satisfactory answers. The arrest report contained several inconsistencies that she had overlooked during the chaos of processing such an unusual suspect. Officer Chen's account of events differed significantly from the physical evidence collected at the scene, and the timeline of the traffic stop contained gaps that raised serious questions about police procedure. General Hammond had been stopped for allegedly erratic driving and speeding, but the dash camera footage from Chen's patrol car told a different story. The video clearly showed the general's sedan maintaining proper speed and staying within traffic lanes for the entire duration of the recorded pursuit. There was no evidence of the dangerous driving that had supposedly justified the initial traffic stop. More concerning was the absence of field sobriety test results. Standard protocol required specific tests to be administered and documented before making a DUI arrest, but Chen's report contained no mention of these procedures being followed. The arrest had escalated from traffic stop to felony charges without any of the intermediate steps that justified such serious accusations. Colonel Mitchell's investigation revealed additional problems with the officer's conduct. General Hammond had been returning from an official Pentagon meeting that had concluded after midnight. She possessed legitimate documentation proving her presence at a classified briefing, providing a verifiable alibi for her activities that evening. The meeting records indicated she had consumed no alcohol during the official function. The colonel's phone call was followed within the hour by a formal inquiry from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. Special Agent Sarah Walsh arrived at the police station before sunrise, accompanied by 2 military police officers and a judge advocate general attorney. Their investigation would run parallel to any civilian proceedings, but with vastly greater resources and authority. Agent Walsh's review of the arrest footage revealed disturbing details that had been missed during the initial processing. General Hammond had not lunged for a weapon in her center console, as Officer Chen had claimed. Instead, she had been reaching for her military identification to present to the officers when Chen forcibly removed her from the vehicle. The entire arrest had been based on a misinterpretation of her cooperative attempt to identify herself as a military officer. The implications were staggering. General Hammond held one of the highest security clearances in the military and had access to classified information that could affect national security if compromised. Her detention by civilian police without proper notification to military authorities violated several federal statutes governing the treatment of senior defense personnel. Chief of Police Margaret Sullivan received word of the military investigation at 6 a.m. and immediately realized her department faced a crisis that could destroy careers and result in federal intervention. She had 30 years of law enforcement experience, but nothing in her background had prepared her to handle the arrest of a 3-star general who appeared to have been wrongfully detained by her officers. The chief's emergency meeting with her senior staff revealed the full scope of the problem. Officer Chen's personnel file contained previous complaints about excessive force and procedural violations that should have resulted in additional training or disciplinary action. His supervisors had overlooked these warning signs, allowing him to continue patrol duties without addressing serious deficiencies in his police work. Rodriguez and Williams found themselves caught in the middle of a rapidly expanding investigation that threatened to end their careers. They had followed Chen's lead during the arrest, trusting his assessment of the situation without conducting their own independent evaluation of the suspect's behavior. Their failure to question obvious inconsistencies in his account made them complicit in what was becoming a clear case of misconduct. General Hammond remained in custody, while military and civilian authorities worked to sort out the legal implications of her arrest. She had been denied her right to contact military superiors immediately upon detention, a violation that could invalidate any charges filed against her. The delay had also prevented proper notification to Pentagon security officials who needed to know about potential compromise of classified information. The general's commanding officer, Lieutenant General Robert Carson, received notification of her detention through unofficial channels rather than proper military reporting procedures. His immediate response was to dispatch a full legal team to San Antonio with orders to investigate every aspect of her treatment and ensure her immediate release from civilian custody. Agent Walsh's forensic examination of the patrol car's dashboard camera revealed additional evidence that contradicted the officer's statements. Audio recordings captured General Hammond clearly identifying herself as a military officer and requesting that proper authorities be contacted. Her calm, professional demeanor throughout the encounter provided no justification for the aggressive arrest tactics that had been employed. The physical evidence painted a picture of police misconduct rather than criminal behavior by the general. She had submitted to handcuffing without resistance, spoken respectfully to all officers involved, and made no threatening gestures that could justify the use of force. The bruises on her wrists from improperly applied handcuffs would provide additional evidence of excessive force. Colonel Mitchell's investigation expanded beyond the immediate circumstances of the arrest to examine the broader patterns of misconduct within the San Antonio Police Department. Officer Chen's previous complaints included allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and failure to follow proper procedures during arrests. The department's Internal Affairs Division had failed to adequately investigate these complaints or implement corrective measures. The Pentagon's involvement brought federal resources to bear on what had initially appeared to be a local police matter. Military investigators had access to classified information about General Hammond's activities and security status that civilian authorities could not obtain through normal channels. This information would prove crucial in demonstrating the wrongful nature of her arrest. General Hammond's phone call during the early morning hours had reached General Carson's direct line at the Pentagon. Her report of improper detention and misconduct allegations triggered immediate action from the highest levels of military command. Within hours, her case had become a priority investigation, involving multiple federal agencies and senior defense officials. The general's calm demeanor during her detention reflected her extensive military training and command experience. She had been captured by enemy forces during her deployment in Afghanistan and had endured interrogation without breaking. A night in a civilian jail cell posed no challenge to someone with her background, but the principle of proper treatment for military personnel was something she would not allow to be compromised. Agent Walsh's interview with General Hammond revealed the full extent of the officer's misconduct. The general had been completely cooperative throughout the traffic stop, providing proper identification when requested and answering all questions truthfully. Her alleged attempt to grab Officer Chen's weapon was actually an attempt to prevent him from falling when he slipped on the wet pavement while approaching her vehicle. The military investigation uncovered additional evidence that Officer Chen had fabricated key elements of his arrest report. Witness statements from nearby residents contradicted his account of General Hammond's behavior, and physical evidence from the scene showed no signs of a struggle or attempted assault. His report contained multiple false statements that could result in federal perjury charges. Chief Sullivan realized her department faced potential federal intervention that could result in a consent decree requiring outside oversight of police operations. The wrongful arrest of a senior military officer had exposed systemic problems with training, supervision, and accountability that federal authorities would not ignore. Her career and the department's autonomy were both at serious risk. The media attention began building as word of the arrest leaked to local news organizations. The story of a decorated female general being wrongfully detained by local police had all the elements needed to become a national scandal. Chief Sullivan's public relations staff scrambled to develop a response strategy, but the facts of the case made defending the officer's actions nearly impossible. General Hammond's military record provided stark contrast to the accusations leveled against her. She had received numerous awards for valor under fire, commendations for leadership excellence, and recognition for her contributions to national security. The idea that such a distinguished officer would attempt to assault a police officer during a routine traffic stop defied credibility. The investigation revealed that General Hammond had been returning from a classified briefing about emerging threats in the Middle East when she was stopped by Officer Chen. Her presence at the Pentagon that evening was documented through multiple security checkpoints and video surveillance systems. The timing of her departure from the meeting and her location when stopped confirmed she had been driving directly home without any stops that could have involved alcohol consumption. Colonel Mitchell's preliminary report to Pentagon leadership outlined serious concerns about the San Antonio Police Department's handling of the case. The failure to properly identify General Hammond as a senior military officer, despite her attempts to provide appropriate credentials, suggested either incompetence or willful disregard for proper procedures. Either explanation was unacceptable when dealing with personnel holding high-level security clearances. The federal investigation began expanding to examine whether the officer's conduct violated civil rights statutes that carried criminal penalties. General Hammond's status as a high-ranking female officer in a male-dominated profession raised additional questions about whether gender bias had influenced the officer's treatment of her during the arrest process. As morning turned to afternoon, pressure mounted on local authorities to resolve the situation quickly and appropriately. General Hammond's continued detention was becoming an embarrassment for both civilian and military leadership, and her immediate release was demanded by Pentagon officials who outranked anyone in the local police command structure. The stage was set for a confrontation between federal and local authorities that would determine not only General Hammond's fate, but the future careers of every officer involved in her wrongful arrest. The phone call to the Pentagon had indeed ruined them, but the full extent of the damage was still being calculated by investigators whose authority far exceeded anything the local police department could challenge. By noon, the San Antonio Police Department was under siege. Federal investigators had taken control of the building's main conference room, transforming it into a command center for what had become a multi-agency investigation. Agent Walsh coordinated with FBI civil rights investigators, Pentagon security officials, and Department of Justice attorneys who had flown in from Washington on military aircraft. General Hammond was released from custody at 11:47 a.m. after spending nearly 11 hours in detention for crimes she had never committed. Her release came not through normal bail procedures, but through direct intervention by Lieutenant General Carson, who had arrived in San Antonio with sufficient federal authority to override local police custody decisions. The general's first act upon release was to call her family and assure them of her safety. Her second was to meet with military attorneys who would handle her civil rights claims against the department. Officer Chen's career ended officially at 2:15 p.m. when Chief Sullivan placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of criminal investigations. His personnel file revealed a pattern of misconduct complaints that supervisors had failed to address adequately, making the department liable for his actions under federal civil rights statutes. The FBI's preliminary review indicated he would face federal charges for violating General Hammond's constitutional rights under color of law. The dashboard camera footage became the centerpiece of the federal investigation. Enhanced digital analysis revealed details that local investigators had missed, including audio evidence that clearly contradicted Officer Chen's written report. General Hammond could be heard identifying herself as a military officer and requesting contact with appropriate authorities, requests that were ignored by all three officers at the scene. Rodriguez discovered the true scope of his predicament when federal agents interviewed him separately from his colleagues. His failure to question Chen's obviously false statements about the arrest made him a potential co-conspirator in civil rights violations. The agents made clear that cooperation with their investigation might be his only chance to avoid federal prosecution, but such cooperation would require admitting to serious misconduct. Williams faced similar pressure during her interview with Agent Walsh. Her decision to search General Hammond's vehicle without proper justification had uncovered the military identification that should have immediately changed how the situation was handled. Instead, she had failed to inform her colleagues about the general's identity until after the arrest was completed, a delay that federal investigators viewed as evidence of deliberate misconduct. The Pentagon's response was swift and comprehensive. Secretary of Defense Patricia Martinez issued a public statement condemning the treatment of General Hammond and announcing a full review of procedures for protecting military personnel from civilian law enforcement misconduct. The statement made clear that the federal government viewed the incident as an attack on military authority and would pursue all available legal remedies. Colonel Mitchell's investigation uncovered systemic problems within the San Antonio Police Department that extended far beyond the officers directly involved in General Hammond's arrest. Training records showed that officers received inadequate instruction on proper procedures for interacting with military personnel, despite the city's large military population. Supervision was inconsistent, and internal affairs investigations were frequently closed without proper resolution. Chief Sullivan realized her own career was in jeopardy when federal investigators requested her personnel files and those of her senior staff. The failure to properly train and supervise officers under her command made her personally liable for the department's misconduct. Her 30-year career in law enforcement would likely end in federal court defending actions she had not directly taken but was responsible for preventing. General Hammond's press conference at 4 p.m. sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Speaking with the calm authority that had earned her 3 stars, she described her treatment in measured but damning terms. Her account of being forcibly removed from her vehicle while attempting to show proper identification contradicted every element of the officers' reports and exposed their statements as fabrications. The general's military bearing during the press conference provided stark contrast to the officers' characterizations of her as belligerent and uncooperative. She answered questions with precision and professionalism, demonstrating the leadership qualities that had earned her position as one of the Army's senior commanders. Her calm recitation of events made the officers' actions appear even more egregious. Media coverage of the incident expanded rapidly as national news organizations picked up the story. The narrative of a decorated female general being wrongfully arrested by local police officers resonated with broader concerns about police accountability and military-civilian relations. Cable news networks provided wall-to-wall coverage of the developing scandal, with legal experts predicting massive financial settlements and criminal prosecutions. The FBI's civil rights investigation revealed evidence that Officer Chen had deliberately falsified his arrest report to justify his misconduct. Witness statements from nearby residents contradicted his account of General Hammond's behavior, and physical evidence from the scene showed no signs of the struggle he had described. Federal prosecutors began preparing charges that could result in years of prison time for the disgraced officer. Rodriguez and Williams learned that their cooperation with federal investigators would not spare them from professional consequences. Both officers were suspended without pay pending completion of the investigation, and their police certifications were under review by state authorities. Their failure to prevent or report Chen's misconduct made them liable for civil damages even if they avoided criminal prosecution. The financial implications for the city became clear as attorneys representing General Hammond filed notice of intent to sue for civil rights violations, false imprisonment, and assault. The federal civil rights statute allowed for unlimited monetary damages when police officers violated constitutional rights under color of law. Legal experts predicted settlements could reach tens of millions of dollars, bankrupting the city's insurance reserves. Agent Walsh's final report detailed a cascade of failures that had enabled the wrongful arrest to occur. Inadequate training, poor supervision, and a culture of covering up misconduct had created an environment where officers felt free to abuse their authority without consequences. The report recommended federal oversight of the department until substantial reforms could be implemented. General Hammond's medical examination documented injuries consistent with excessive force during her arrest. Bruises on her wrists from improperly applied handcuffs, abrasions from being forced to the pavement, and psychological trauma from her wrongful detention provided additional evidence for civil rights claims. Military medical personnel would monitor her condition and provide expert testimony about the impact of her mistreatment. The Pentagon's security review revealed that General Hammond's detention had potentially compromised classified information to which she had access. Although no actual breach of national security had occurred, the failure to properly notify military authorities of her arrest violated federal statutes designed to protect sensitive defense information. Additional charges against the officers were possible under espionage-related laws. Officer Chen's arrest on federal civil rights charges occurred at his home 3 days after General Hammond's release. FBI agents executed the warrant with full media coverage, ensuring maximum publicity for the department's misconduct. His booking into federal custody on the same charges he had falsely leveled against General Hammond provided poetic justice that was not lost on observers. The consent decree imposed on the San Antonio Police Department required federal oversight of all operations for a minimum of 5 years. The agreement mandated comprehensive retraining, new supervision protocols, and independent monitoring of use-of-force incidents. The cost of compliance would exceed $20 million and require fundamental changes to police culture. Rodriguez and Williams avoided federal prosecution by agreeing to cooperate fully with civil litigation against the department. Their testimony about Chen's pattern of misconduct and supervisory failures would be crucial in establishing the city's liability for damages. Both officers resigned from the force and faced professional sanctions that would prevent future employment in law enforcement. Chief Sullivan's retirement announcement came 1 week after the federal investigation began. Her departure was negotiated as part of a broader settlement that included pension forfeiture and agreement not to seek law enforcement positions in the future. The chief, who had spent 3 decades building a reputation for professional excellence, saw her legacy destroyed by one night's misconduct. General Hammond returned to her Pentagon duties with enhanced security protocols reflecting lessons learned from her wrongful arrest. Military personnel now carried special identification that required immediate contact with federal authorities if detained by civilian police. The incident had created new procedures designed to prevent similar violations of military personnel's rights. The civil lawsuit filed by General Hammond's attorneys sought $50 million in damages from the city, the police department, and the individual officers involved. The complaint detailed systematic civil rights violations that had created a culture where misconduct was tolerated and covered up. Legal experts predicted the case would result in one of the largest police misconduct settlements in recent history. The 3 officers who had destroyed their careers in one night learned that actions have consequences that extend far beyond immediate circumstances. Chen faced years in federal prison. Rodriguez and Williams lost their livelihoods, and Chief Sullivan saw her life's work tainted by their misconduct. The phone call to the Pentagon had indeed ruined them, but it had also exposed a system that needed fundamental reform. General Hammond's vindication was complete, but the broader implications of her case would resonate throughout law enforcement for years to come. Her wrongful arrest had revealed the danger of unchecked police authority and the importance of accountability systems that protect citizens from those who abuse their power. One phone call had brought down an entire command structure and forever changed how military personnel would be treated by civilian authorities. The officers had learned too late that rank, authority, and federal jurisdiction matter in ways they had never been trained to understand. Their failure to recognize General Hammond's status and treat her with appropriate respect had cost them everything they had worked to achieve. The consequences of their actions would serve as a warning to law enforcement agencies across the nation about the price of misconduct and the importance of constitutional rights that apply to everyone, regardless of their position or authority. The final irony was that General Hammond had been completely cooperative throughout the encounter, making the officers' aggressive response both unnecessary and inexcusable. Their inability to recognize her professionalism and respond appropriately had transformed what should have been a routine interaction into a career-ending catastrophe that would follow them for the rest of their lives.